the little details, such as some grass, a plow, the fence, and a bunch of other debris. For sure, one of them was a tire, and the other stuff was probably leftover building materials, such as tiles. But besides just painting the sun, the important thing was to try to show how it illuminated everything. Hello and welcome. My name is Charlambos. I go by Bob, and I'm not your typical painter. And in today's video, I will show you how I finished this painting. At least how I finished the lighting. But first, let me show you the old painting and the areas of opportunity that I saw. To begin, I didn't think the sun was bright enough. I definitely wanted to give it a more glaring effect, but in order to do that, touching up the landscape was necessary. There were lots of blades of grass that had highlights. I wanted to add more. There were also objects, such as this plow here with many different highlights and bright spots. Besides grass, there were many plants too. This one in front of the tire looks like it's engulfed in sunlight, and I wanted to capture that from the photo. And lastly, there was the fence, where almost every link had a highlight. Here's my reference photo that I used. As you can see, there's not much lighting, so I had very little visibility to work with. One thing I did want to depict very well is the way that the sun illuminates everything. Anyways, now time for the demonstration. First order of business, I needed to sand the sun, especially since the paint was thick there. Just a very light sanding with a small piece of high grit sandpaper. I didn't want to remove too much paint. After I was done sanding, I started to paint from the center of the sun by applying some titanium white, especially since the goal was to get the sun as bright as possible. But I was trying to be very strategic. I painted between some of the leaves and branches. Since I only lightly sanded, they were still visible. So in a way, I still had a blueprint and guide when repainting this area, allowing me to in a way keep what I like, but correct what I didn't. Then I started to repaint some of the leaves, applying a very pale orange, but just like the white, I'm being more strategic this time around by adding some of that golden light orange among the dark leaves, as well as close to the center of the sun. The key to make the sun appear very bright is to have the center as white as possible, and the leaves and branches that are closest to the center have to be very faint and pale, as well as bright too. And as you paint the ones that are further from the center, they should be more opaque and darker. Besides painting leaves and branches, I'm also trying to paint streaks of light too, mostly with a pale orange that I made. After applying the lines of paint, I would dry brush it, softening the lines to give the illusion of rays of sunlight. Just so you know, at this point, most of the tree is dry, so I'm practically spreading the paint on a dry surface. Now it is time to paint some of the darker tones, such as a branch that is right in front of the sun and the darker leaves. Initially, I messed up by including some red in my dark mixture, but it's okay. I will correct this later. After this, I stick to just the oranges and yellows when it comes to the sunlight. Anyhow, I carefully try to repaint this section with the darks. Since the bright sunlight colors are still wet, I tread very carefully. The last thing I want to do is muddy the sunlight and introduce a neutral tone into something that is very bright and light. But at the same time, I want to also increase the contrast of the sunlight. And what better way to do that than have an extreme dark next to a extreme bright. As I apply the darker leaves, they appear to have a chunky look, probably because I use very thick paint for the bright area. That is something I will fix also later, with dry brushing of course. Though unfortunately I didn't film that part, but I carefully dry brushed between the borders where the darks met the lights. Anyhow, I'm going to speed through the rest of this section, but don't worry, I will come back to it at the very end, especially since I made a decision that went against the photo. I just continue building this section up, painting darker leaves, and applying some bright ones as well here and there, including some distant highlights in some of the darker areas of the tree. Sunlight does travel after all. I also correct some of the red that I applied earlier by accident by using some orange and then dry brushing the branch and diluting the red away. Now time to talk more about light traveling. Just painting a sun is not enough to give the illusion of sunlight. In a landscape painting, there's objects and things that illuminate, with the sun usually being the only source of light. Despite this being in a foggy day, since it is sunrise, the sunlight is very intense. So yes, I will definitely focus on highlights, but here and there I will definitely also focus on some of the darks too. Like mentioned before, to increase the sense of contrast and amplify the brightness as a result. That is why for some of the straight sections of the plow, I don't just paint the highlights, I also increase the nearby darks too. Oh, by the way, because the paint is dry, it is very easy to correct mistakes. So if I'm trying to paint a very straight line of light and it is off a little, I just use a dry brush, usually a flat, to straighten it by gently erasing. And if I have to, I will dip the brush in some solution or use a cloth to clean it, which is a good reason why to do certain things at the end, like these very bright highlights and thin lines. Besides erasing paint with a brush, sometimes the only way to correct a section is to repaint the surrounding area, which I had to do a few times, like the grass and field. Also, another thing to point out is the different colors of light. Some are cool and some are warm. It all has to do with the direction. Reflecting light ends up being on the cooler side, and the light that's directly from the sun is definitely warmer and brighter. And in some areas where there's different tones in the same area, it could be from imperfections, like the very top bar of the plow. I'm not sure how it looks in broad daylight, but I'm pretty sure there's rust and paint chips throughout the whole plow, which is why in some scenarios I'm not just painting straight lines, but segments of color to help give the illusion that the plow has lots of imperfections. Now on to the next section, which has lots of debris, including a tire. I start off with the tire. It was not shiny enough, at least for the part where the sun was hitting it. This was actually one of the harder things to paint among all the debris, because it was round, which leads me to talk about ellipses. And a common error in a lot of beginners' paintings, or drawings for that matter, are the sharp pointy edges that ellipses have. At no point does a circle make a point, but I've seen the ellipses of cups, bottles, and so on with sharp pointy edges. And this is probably from the illusion if it's too eye level. Should I do a video about ellipses? I think it could be quite helpful. Anyhow, the tire is not a perfect circle. There are some visible grooves. I do my best to capture what is visible in the photo, which is not much, plus grass will be covering a little bit of it as well. More on that later. Now time to paint more things hidden in the grass. I will be honest, I do not know what most of these objects are, but I think they might be square tiles from some renovation and just dumped outside. So in a way, I just paint the unknown. And the goal at this point is to enhance the lighting and paint some grass here and there too. Speaking of grass, this is actually a good opportunity to paint more grass blades. There are also some other plants too. I'm not too sure what they are as well. So like before, I'm painting the unknown, but I'm carefully trying to look at the photo to detail them, especially the highlights and the way they react to sunlight. I'm using mostly cadmium yellow and orange, as well as titanium white, but I'm also using viridian and chromium green light. Now on to something that was very fun to paint, the fence. And I'm just kidding about that, by the way. It was just a little bit tedious, that's all. As I paid attention to the photo, I did notice that the fence reacted to the sunlight. So now that the fence is dry, it was a good opportunity to do the highlights. Like before, I figured if I mess up, I could just wipe the area with a brush or a cloth, and I did mess up several times. But anyways, when doing the chain links, I actually did not follow the photo too much. To me, it just made sense to paint the bright highlights on the very top of the links, and I kept in mind the direction of the sun as I did this. The color I used was pretty much titanium white with a dash of cadmium yellow pale, but I did use my dark viridian and alizarin crimson tone too to correct some of the links too. Also, I tried to make sure that the links that were closer to the sun were brighter. Also, while painting the fence, it was a good time to start painting some of the pipes that were on the bottom of the fence and the poles that held the fence together as well. Let's speed through this section a little bit. I don't know if you noticed, but besides painting the fence, I was trying to depict some of the plants. Besides creating some new ones, I was also trying to enhance the lighting on the ones that were already there. Plus, more grass of course. And just like the fence, I paid attention to where the sun was and tried to make the grass and plants brighter that were closer to the sun. Now to finish this area, I began painting more and more grass. And I didn't just focus on the highlights. Some of the grass blades were barely visible, particularly the ones that were not in direct sunlight. There was also grass among the debris, including the tire, some in front and some behind it. And some of the grass also casted shadows on this debris. But besides the grass, I actually took the time to paint the highlights that were between the grass blades on the debris that is scattered on the ground. The ultimate goal? To give the sense of light, whether it's the plants, the grass, or all that junk on the ground. Anyways, let me talk about the technique I used. There were definitely several paintbrushes that I had at my disposal. My favorite was definitely a liner brush, a Da Vinci Kolinsky red sable one that was very long. It was definitely very helpful for very thin blades of grass. I also used very small round brushes too, especially for all the other plants, and some of the thicker grass blades too. But I did also use a big round brush too, mostly for dry brushing. I did not want all the grass blades to be very sharp, so at certain points I would use it to soften some of them, especially the ones in the shade or darkness. But for sure, the ones that were in direct sunlight, I tried to keep them as sharp as possible. For a moment I thought I was done with the painting, but the more I stared at it, I felt like I needed to work on the sun and tree a little bit more. So what do? I go back at it again. But first I tried to make the sun brighter. One of the things I thought it was missing is a glow, particularly in the sky actually. So I apply a very bright titanium white with a dash of cadmium yellow pale, and I start to apply it in specific areas between the leaves that surround the sun. Speaking of the sun, I applied some in the center of it as well too. But to get the full effect of a glow, I use a small piece of foam and start to try to spread the paint around, creating in a way little streaks into the sky and also a little bit into the tree as well. I was not too concerned that I would actually paint over some of the leaves. If anything, I thought it might add to the glow. And my mindset was that in the worst case scenario, I would have to repaint some branches and leaves, and that I did. I had to repeat the process until I felt I got the desired look. Also, be cautious of what you use. The little piece of foam I was using was actually breaking apart, and I had to try to make sure I picked out the small pieces, either with the foam or with my fingers or brush. Anyhow, as soon as I felt I got the desired look, I started painting something else that bothered me. The tree itself. At least to extend it a bit. Not by much, but I felt it could benefit if I extended the branches a little bit to the left and also darkened some of the leaves that were in front of the sun to create more contrast. But besides extending the tree, there were other issues too. I wanted to paint some more highlighted leaves. I didn't go in too much detail doing that. I just used a very pale orange to paint the illusion of some well-lit leaves here and there, all with some simple brush strokes of lines and dots. I kept doing it until at one point I felt satisfied. Except for one more thing, my signature. It actually used to be somewhere near the sun, and it vanished in the chaos. Where is it? Well, I figured I will show it in a short. Stay tuned for that. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful. It doesn't show how I did the complete painting. If anything, it shows mostly on how I enhanced the lighting, plus the way I analyze things. If there's one message I want to get across in this video, it's sometimes you have to really look at your painting and see what is necessary to finish it. And for me, it was the sunlight. It was not bright enough. Anyway, for more of my work, check out my Instagram. Not your typical painter, of course. Anyways, bye for now.